Hello again, this is Bill Frangos. I'm going to tie a pheasant tail for you. Pheasant tail is a pretty good beginner pattern. It works absolutely everywhere, imitates mayfly nymphs, and tied properly, it'll really produce for you. So what I've got in the vise is a size 12 hook. Dry fly or a nymph, you can use either. What I've got in front of me is some Veevus 8/0 thread, and I'm just using black. You could use brown, green. You can tie these in various dyed colors. I'm going to go ahead and start the thread by draping it over the hook. And I'm going to start it at about the halfway point on the hook shank. I'm going to wrap it all the way back to the bend of the hook. To the end of the hook shank. I know I'm there if I let it drop down, and it crosses the barb of the hook, which is knowing that you're in the right place. What I'm going to do now is tie in some, I've got brassie copper wire. I'm just going to go ahead and tie that in. Pretty simple to tie this in. I'm going to put it at a 45-degree angle between the hook shank and the thread. So that's 90. Cut that in half. Kind of rock it up under. Lift. That traps that wire. Then I can just wrap that down. Come up the thread and back down to the tie-in point again. At the tie-in point is a great place to pull out here. I'm going to show you how I prepare the feather. Again, I'm using a pheasant tail, as it is a pheasant tail nymph. What I've got is the individual fibers on the pheasant tail. You can see, I'm just going to separate a group off. There might be 8 to a dozen strands here. I'm going to pull them 90 degrees from the stem, okay? And that's going to align the tips. So when I bring that up, you see the tips are aligned? If I use these and trim it, the tips won't be aligned. If I pull it 90 degrees from the stem, I can strip these off, and that's what you normally do is pinch them and then pull the stem and strip them off. It leaves the little curlies. And the little curlies on there keep the feathers from moving very well. You trim them off, and that'll just make your life a little easier. The feathers, the fibers themselves grip into each other, and that's one of those properties that you have to deal with. So if you pull them off correctly, they'll stay that way. What I'm going to do now is measure. I want to measure this tail about a half a hook shank in length. And by doing that, when I do a half a hook shank in length, I'm going to transfer it to the other hand, and I'm going to use the pinch wrap again right here. You bring it up between your thumb and forefinger, pinch the thread, You've got, you're able to leave a little bit of loose thread there. I'm going to bring it down on the back side of the hook and pull it straight down. When I do that, it's going to attach it exactly where I want it, on top of the hook shank, and it'll be tied in exactly where I want it. I can then take a look and say, okay, is that tail the right length? It's half a hook shank. That's perfect. I can then wrap over it once or twice. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this thread forward to where we're going to do our next tie down. So I've got these fibers hanging up above the hook shank right now. I've got the thread wrapped forward. I'm going to grab these fibers with my right hand, bring them down to my left hand. Okay? If you've got long fibers, you can do this transfer very easily. If they're short fibers, they don't work so well. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is bring my left hand above the hook shank and pinch it. Just press against the hook shank. Then I can reach under with my right hand and grab those fibers. My first wrap will be towards the tail. And the reason I do that is to cover up any thread. Then I'm going to pinch it down, move my thread, and start spiraling forward. And I'm just going to do touching turns until I get to my thread. If you do that, your body will be proportioned nicely. It will look fantastic. And you will have very few issues. When I get to the thread, I'm holding the fibers up at an angle. I'll just lift my thread, drape it over twice, pull these fibers back, do a locking wrap or two in front, and those are basically done. I can trim off the excess. I have the body. I'm then going to grab the wire. I'm going to lift it straight up. But instead of wrapping the same way we did the fibers, we're going to counter wrap that. So I'm going to bring this down in front of the hook shank and then come up behind it and over the top. And now I'm just going to spiral this forward, which is going to give me the rib that I want. This serves two functions. It's counter wrapping the pheasant tail, which will make the pheasant tail last much longer. And the other thing it's doing is not burying itself within the pheasant tail, so it makes the wrapping much more visible. When I get to where the thread is, I'm going to then do 2 wraps in front, or 2 wraps behind. So I'm holding it with my right hand straight up or off at a 45-degree angle. I do 2 wraps, and you can do 3. It doesn't matter. And then a couple of wraps behind. At that point, I can crimp that wire a little bit just by pushing it with a fingernail forward and back. Okay. And then I'm going to helicopter that off. So I'm going to hold the hook so I don't put any excess stress on that hook where it's connected to the vise. Okay. And helicopter that wire off. That breaks right at that point. It's right where we want it. And I'm ready to put in the wing case. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that pheasant tail again. Bring it back up. And I'm going to strip off more fibers. Now, how many more? I'm going to get about a gap of fibers, a little more than the gap, the hook gap, which is the space between the shank and the point. I'm going to pull them straight out, just like we did before. I'm going to grab the feather and strip it away from the fibers. Okay? So just by grabbing that feather, I'm going to trim those straight. Really not a problem. I've got these nice and straight here. The tips are all lined up very nicely. But I'm actually going to trim these a little bit. So I'm going to pinch it and leave just a little bit hanging out and trim that down. Then I can just roll my fingers back and place them on top of the hook shank. So I want to leave room at the head. The biggest problem most people have, especially beginning tiers, is they crowd the head, which makes tying a knot difficult. It makes everything else difficult. So again, here, pinch wrap. Up, above, straight down. Up above, pinch it, straight down. And when I say straight down, I don't mean continue on with the bobbin like you would when you're wrapping. I mean literally pull that thread right up against the hook shank straight down. That's tied in. And I'm going to wrap this actually back onto the body. So now I'm tied into the body. This is going to be the wing case. It'll fold over the body. I've now going to put on some Peacock herring. And I have to actually look to see where I have them. Here we go. I've got several strands of Peacock herring. And this is a nice long bunch of Peacock herring. And you notice I've got the where they attach to the feather lined up down here. I'm doing that so I don't have any strays. Peacock herring are notoriously brittle right at the ends. So if you look, I'm barely pinching these things and they're just breaking off. Instead of breaking all those off, I'm just going to trim off a little portion of them. Okay? And I'm going to take that portion, lay it up on the hook shank, and I'm going to do the pinch wrap again. Pinch, pull. Pinch, pull down. I'm going to wrap down the rest of those. Put a little thread base. Okay. Come back up, and I'm going to stop the thread about an eye length behind the hook eye. So you see where that is? That's about an eye length behind the hook eye. The reason I'm doing that is that's where I'm going to tie these down. So you can then twist these peacock herrings and it'll actually form a little rope. So I'm just twisting them with my fingers, forming a little rope and wrapping. And I'm going to wrap forward. Okay. And I like mine with a fat thorax, so I'm going to wrap back over it. Come all the way back to where the tie-in point of the wing is. And wrap forward again. Until I get to where the thread's waiting. And that's where the thread's waiting. Here I'm going to just lift the thread straight up, come down the back side, and just drop it over. All I'm doing is dropping it. I'm really not putting a lot of pressure on. I'll do that 2 or 3 times. Then I'm going to pull these fibers back and do a couple of locking wraps in front. Okay? And trim those off. You can use those butts again on the next fly if you'd like, and it should work out okay. Doing a little adjusting here. Okay, now we just have to put in legs. So I'm going to grab that pheasant again, and I'm going to grab a half dozen, 8 or so. Pull it again 90 degrees. Pull the actual feather away from the fibers. Trim off the curlies. And now I'm going to measure my legs. So to measure this, I'm turning this fly so you can see how I'm going to measure. I'm going to measure it to where it's a little bit longer than the peacock herald, where the peacock herald's tied in. I'm putting it on the side of the fly, and I'm just going to pinch that down with my fingers and throw a loose wrap and a tighter wrap and a tighter still. And that's legs on one side. So I'm going to go ahead and trim. Which would have been easier had I changed my glasses back. I normally wear bifocals, so I'm looking over the top of my glasses, so I'm not seeing as well as I should. I'm going to flip this fly over to the other side and tie the legs on the other side. So again, pretty simple. I'm going to grab several fibers, 6 to 8, give or take. Pull the feather, trim the curlies, measure. So I'm going to measure a little bit longer. So I'm going to grab it here and get closer with my fingers. There we go. A little bit longer. Lay it on there. Pinch it down. Throw a loose thread wrap. A little tighter. A little tighter still. One more just to make sure. If I want, I can throw one in front. Like that. That counterlocks it. And you see how the legs are splaying on that? That's what you want. You want something to give you a little movement. Okay? Now all we have to do is bring that wing case forward. When I bring the wing case forward, I'm just going to prop my finger over the back. Okay? Lay it on top. Make sure it's laid right on top. Okay? And then I can put my finger on it. Loose thread wrap. A little tighter. Tighter still. Then I can pull that back away from the hook eye. Do a couple of wraps in front. At this point, I normally just jam my thumbnail right in there. Kind of pack that down. And now I'm ready to whip finish it. So I can then trim this because it's on there good and tight. Lay it on, trim it off. grab my whip finisher. Okay. Create my little 4 here. Build a little head if you'd like. I normally, again, throw a couple of whip finishes in because I typically don't want to use head cement. Just a personal preference. Nothing wrong with head cement. I just don't use it that often. Pull it nice and tight. And trim your thread. And you've got a completed pheasant tail. So if you look there, you got a nice wing case on the back, a nice tail. Although mine, I did pull that down a little bit into the hook bend. I can pull it back up and it'll do just fine. There's the tail. The underside is peacock herald. The legs are splayed out. That's a dog that'll hunt right there. You can replace that the pheasant wing case with a piece of mylar tinsel, and it becomes a flashback. But that same pheasant tail works great anytime. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. I'm the Fish God 1, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.